Welcome to the Hernia Gods Podcast. This is your mere mortal host, Luke Elms. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on this podcast belong solely to the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy, position, or opinions of Orlando Health or any of our employers. And now, without further ado, let's talk hernias. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hernia Gods Podcast. This is your mere mortal host, Luke Elms. Today we are joined by Charlotte Horne, a hernia surgeon out of the Mayo Clinic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a real honor to have you on, and we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. As we start every episode, I'd love to just hear you tell us who you are, how you got where you are, and where you come from.
Awesome. Well, I am a Canadian. Currently living in probably the most Canadian part of the U.S. I did all of my non-medical education in Canada and then actually went to medical school in the Cayman Islands in Grand Cayman, which was absolutely lovely. We do 2 years there, and then I did 2 years kind of all throughout all my clinicals throughout the eastern coast or eastern side of the U.S., and then did my residency in Cleveland at the Cleveland Clinic. I stayed on for an extra year to do the Abwell Recon Fellowship with Rosen. I was going to do an MIS fellowship after that because I just wanted to be trained forever. And I said, I'm going to fix paraesophageal and peristomal hernias, and that's going to be my life. But actually, the fellowship director of the MIS fellowship sat me down and said, hey, are you allergic to money? And I was like, well, clearly I am. And so he thoughtfully told me that, you'd probably be more marketable as a hernia surgeon than an MIS surgeon. So, get a job. And so I did. My first job was in Hershey, Pennsylvania with Eric Pauli. I was there for 3 years and now have moved to Rochester, Minnesota at the Mayo Clinic. And I've been here for 2.5 years already. So
nice. And so what part of Canada did you grow up in?
I'm from super northern Alberta. So I grew up in this small town called Fort McMurray, Alberta. There was like 30,000 people there when we first moved there. Now there's like 150,000. So the same size as Rochester. And then went and did my university at the University of Alberta. So in Edmonton. So I say I'm from Alberta because I've literally lived in every major city in Alberta for at least a few years of my life.
Nice. Yeah. We, so is that like is that like area farming area or what kind of, industries are on there?
So in, Fort McMurray, it's all oil and mining. So that's actually where a lot of the oil comes from in Canada. As you move further south, you have a lot of farming and agriculture. And then I think what makes Alberta the most famous is we have the beautiful Rocky Mountains and Banff. So
yeah. So did you grow up doing any winter sports up there?
Absolutely. I was a big snowboarder for the overwhelming majority of my life. And then I met my husband, who is from Florida. Introduced him to the sports activities, but shockingly enough, I became a certified scuba diver when I was in university because my parents were like, let's just do this. It'll be fun. And so me and all of my siblings got scuba certified when I was in university. And I introduced my husband to scuba diving, and we are now like addicted. So when we are not in freezing in Rochester, we're under the water somewhere looking at fishes and sharks for the most part.
Yeah, I'm not a scuba diver. Mm-hmm. That's for some reason, I think it's like thalassophobia or whatever it is, a fear of like the super depths of the ocean, like the part of like Titanic when the ship goes like under the water all the way and then there's like nothing on the surface. That's like the most terrifying thing in the world to me. And I don't know why I would. So scuba diving is not for me.
Oh my gosh, we love it. Well, you would hate it because the reason we go back to the Cayman Islands, because that's where we met. So we met in medical school. We go back there every single year to scuba dive because the underwater topology of the Cayman Islands is quite interesting. There's a huge trench right off the Cayman Islands that's like 5,000 feet deep. So you get to dive all of these beautiful pinnacles, and like one side it's just coral, and then you look to the other side, it's just blue forever. It's quite eerie, but it's very, very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like a quick way for me to get like the bends. I would like freak out and try to swim to the surface. I'd be the guy you'd be like holding down. I did like scuba diving once when I was in Hawaii as a kid, and I got to like 25 feet. My ears wouldn't equalize because my face is all misshapen, and I think my eustachian tubes are all jacked up. But anyway, I got to like 25 feet, and I just like sat there at 25 feet while everybody else went down further, and I was just like, okay. But yeah, no, you'll never catch me doing that. But you have a very interesting like leisure activity range. It's like you have like I don't know, a 15,000 foot range between like Banff snowboarding all the way to the depth of a trench.
Yeah, it's a real big problem though, because you can't do both activities at the same time. Because you can't go to super high altitudes after you scuba, and it's also really important or unfortunate because Mayo does they've very thoughtfully scheduled all of their educational meetings or CME meetings in Hawaii every year in January and February, because nobody wants to be in Rochester at that time. It's like brutally cold, but all the Hernia meetings are ski meetings in February. So it's like hard to justify being gone for a week to Hawaii and then being gone for a week to ski, all because of education. So I'm forced every single year to choose either scuba diving or snowboarding, and my husband heavily leans to scuba diving, and so we've been absent from the winter ski meetings for the past couple of years because we've been scuba diving in Hawaii. So
I could think of worse reasons. I could think of worse reasons to miss the meeting. Yeah, no, it's a very interesting thing. How often do you get to go do those things? Is that what you kind of do to decompress?
Absolutely. I think, the best part about scuba diving is nobody can talk to you. Nobody can email you. Nobody can page you for just like an hour. It's like the most peaceful thing in the world. And so we try to avoid Rochester winters as much as possible. So the rule is you can't take any vacation from June until August, because that's when it's actually nice here. And then starting November, we pick places to go. We have actually scuba dive with two of my girlfriends from residency. So we do a group trip once a year. We go back to Cayman every year. And then we try to find a new interesting place every year to go.
So that's, you did so you would have been considered an international medical grad, right?
I was.
Yeah, that's pretty. And did you feel like that put you at a disadvantage, or did you feel like you were on a level playing field when you came back? Because we always heard, when we were going through and talking about applying, like the only place we knew about whenever my wife and I were applying for medical school was like Ross. And so we were talking about applying all those different places, and they're like, well, you may have a hard time matching. Was that your experience? Or you obviously matched extraordinarily well, so I'm assuming you just like kicked butt in school.
Yeah, well, I think the other thing is like right when I was going into matching, things are a little bit different now than they are now. Like I think to be an IMG and not have, like I didn't do any research years, and I actually didn't do a prelim spot. I matched directly into a categorical position. And I will say, like, I was convinced that they had made a mistake on their paperwork. So I signed that contract and returned it like within hours. I was like, I'm in. I have the paperwork. But I think like now to be an IMG and try and get into a categorical spot is like really unfortunate and probably something that just like almost never happens. And to be honest, I think that's kind of a sad thing, because oftentimes there are some unique qualities that people that are either are international for whatever reason kind of have to overcome in order to get into a position where they are a competitive candidate. Like oftentimes you have to have, like back then, insane step scores. You see these people doing all of this research. And honestly, as a medical student at a Caribbean school, it was kind of up to me to plan all of my electives. So here I am, like, living in some pretty suboptimal places in the middle of nowhere, Baltimore, driving up after like a day of a surgery rotation in Baltimore to New York to look at an apartment because that's where my next place was. And so I think there are a lot of things that you learn about life. And you kind of learn how to overcome obstacles and not deal with no. And I think those are things that it's really hard to actively portray in an application. I think a lot of times when you're reviewing applications, you're kind of like, well, how do we even compare these people to these people? Because for some reason, they weren't a good candidate and couldn't get into a U.S. medical school. And I honestly think that's actually pretty short-sighted, because oftentimes the route that these international medical grads have to take, or we have to take in order to get into a competitive spot, is it's so much work. And a lot of times it's so much work with not a lot of guidance. Like, I remember I was in Brooklyn, New York for my peds rotation. We only saw like sickle cell kids. It was actually a very eye-opening experience. But I needed to take step 2 CS at a certain time in order to like get my score in for my application, so my application package would be complete. And I literally, like, there was no dates available, and they email you to say one is available. And I called my parents. I'm like, you're going to get a call from me. I'm going to ask for your credit card number, and I'm going to be booking flights to do this test because I absolutely have to. And that's what happened. You booked the test in. I called my mom, and I was like, I got to go to LA. I'm in New York City to take this test and come back. And it was just like, it's just kind of, it is what it is. And I look back now and I'm like, oh my gosh, I would just absolutely never do any of the things that I did back then. And you're kind of just oblivious. And you're on your mission to, like, get your spot. And you do what it takes. So,
yeah, I think looking from the outside in with the perspective of time, it's been a while since I graduated medical school, probably longer than I'd like to admit. But with the way that my medical education went, I look at some of the people's pathways like you took, and I'm just like, dude, there were so many times that I was living a charmed life by comparison, and I was just like, I can't do this. This is ridiculous. And you're like, the thing I think I would find the hardest was jumping around all over the Eastern Seaboard to get your clinicals in, and the kind of like a nomadic lifestyle while under the incredible pressure to perform, because I think that it's hard enough when you have like a stable home life and you're kind of like at your home, you get to go home and do your decompression, you're relaxing, but much less trying to find like your next place to live and trying to find your trying to figure out like where I can go buy groceries. That's a good grocery store around here. Like even just little basic things that I think would make just the experience of medical school even harder. And I have a ton of respect for people such as yourself that go through that. Obviously you have to be, it probably selects out pretty heavily for like self-starters and people. I mean, I would imagine that when you got into surgery residency, did you feel like that level of uncertainty to kind of make it, graduate or bust kind of attitude? Do you think that helped you through your surgery residency?
I mean, totally. Well, and actually, my parents had kind of told me at the end of 4 years, they're like, med school is 4 years, so you have 4 years to get this sorted, and like, you have to get a job. Like, what are you going to do for this? Like, if you don't match, what are you going to do? So I actually had 3 general surgery interviews. That was all. And programs 4 through like 15 that I think ranked were all medicine. And so I was like, listen, I will go into the things. I'll be very happy if I get into surgery. And obviously it like found its way. But you kind of learn how to get things done. And I think you're very used to not, having things straightforward from the beginning. And I think the other thing that made it like super complex is obviously I am Canadian living in the US. And so things like having to register a vehicle, like my boyfriend at the time, his dad had like legal power of attorney in order for me to register the vehicle. So I could actually have a car to drive to all of these things. So like all of these things, you kind of really start to learn how to be like, okay, like here's the problem. And when you hear no or I don't know the first time, you start to be like, all right, so but I need to get this done. How am I going to figure out the solution to the problem?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're kind of just used to life being hiccup after hiccup. And I feel like sometimes that's what residency is like, hiccup after hiccup. I also am super grateful from of where I trained. We trained some fantastic residents here, but I think one thing, for better or worse, about my training program is I kind of equate it to being like a Bambi, where you're just a baby deer. And if you don't learn how to run immediately, you will 100% get eaten.
Mm-hmm.
They were such a high volume institution doing very, very complex procedures. And now as an attending, I go back and just thank God for all of these very, very patient people that were willing to just watch me be an absolute terrible laparoscopist and just struggle. But they're doing that and doing so many cases a day. So I think, one thing that I picked up pretty early on is I'm in a residency with a lot of people, and I could either be somebody that, just fades into the background and go unnoticed 100%, mm-hmm. or I can kind of really take the initiative to get good, and you had to get good quick. Because if you wanted to do things, which obviously you want to do as a surgery resident, you'd have to be able to know what needs to happen. You need to know what the attending wants you to do, and then to be able to do it with relatively few tries. And so I think recognizing that fairly early on to be listen, I'm this baby deer and I'm going to have to learn how to run real quick. Otherwise, I'm never going to get to do the stuff that I want to do in the OR, was really helpful. And I think one of the things that translates from being an international medical grad is you understand there's got a lot of work you got to do on your own time. Mm-hmm. And so I will say until almost my last day of fellowship, I was in the FLS trainer, suturing something, doing something. It was just kind of, it became my decompression to just go there and just tie laparoscopic knots at the end of the day. So,
yeah. You talked about how you have to kind of learn how to just work through uncertainty. You have to kind of blaze your own path. You have to be pretty adaptive, it sounds like, through your education to get to where you are today. Do you think that is that living in those types of uncertainties and that kind of having to prove yourself through the different adaptions you have to overcome and the different obstacles you have to overcome? Do you feel like that's something that provides you professional fulfillment?
I wouldn't say it provides professional fulfillment. I do think it helps you kind of navigate challenges throughout your professional career. So, when I started my job there hadn't really been somebody that has done an ab wall fellowship almost ever here. And there wasn't a truly trained ab wall surgeon here for at least 2 years before I started. So here I am at the number one institution in the world. And I'm all right, we're going to do an E-10. And nobody has seen one. Mm-hmm. Nobody even knows what you need to do. None of the residents have seen one. You kind of realize that you're going to have to grow this in a way that is, I would say, 100% taken for granted for. I had been at 2 institutions where I had fantastic mentors that kind of had set the pathway. And so you kind of could just plug and go, if you will. But now I'm here at an institution where I'm okay, doing robotic surgeries, which most people have not been doing, or if they have, it was at pretty low volume. And then on top of that, also doing some of these crazy, massive, very large hernias and trying to curate a narrative that was very different than most people had even heard for, honestly, a decade. Still doing plugs. And I'm all right, guys, here I am. I know I'm not maybe who you would expect to be here telling you how we're going to fix hernias, but okay, it'll be okay. And so I think it's, the same sort of grind mentality of you hear, I'm not sure, or we've never done that before, to be okay, I get that. Mm-hmm. Here's how we're going to navigate this relationship in order to get everybody on board. I think that's one of the things that's been the most challenging here, is to be yes, I understand that this is how you've done things for a very, very long time, but how do we kind of grow this moving forward? And it's really hard to grow when you're a voice of one and an N of one.
Right.
And people are like, what you're doing is absolutely crazy. And it does take a lot of work to do that. But I have truly found that here, like once you get people to buy in and get everybody on board, we are like cruising, which has been really fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, because you come in with a pretty incredible pedigree of education, and then but you're entering a place that has the reputation that has, and usually with that reputation, there's an expectation of quality, and the expectation of quality prior to you getting there and even after you're there, I'm sure it was high both times, but maybe even higher now. But there's a lot of inertia, even in smaller institutions, around this is the way we've always done it. And I can only imagine in a place that is accepted as one of the top institutions in the world, that inertia may even be harder to shift. Was that your experience?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that makes hernia surgery such a fun field to go into is not only is there's a lot of inertia in our own subspecialty. Like we're constantly trying to evolve techniques. We're constantly trying to improve care for patients. There are so many things that we're learning every single day. And so I sort of, unless you're somebody that's kind of in that educational space, if you thought, hey, I'm going to miss, let's say you didn't attend hernia meetings for like the last 5 or 6 years, certainly the last decade, you're just like, it's completely different. Like the world of hernia surgery is so different than it was like 10, 15 years ago. And I think that is great for so many reasons. But it's also something that if you're kind of walking into an environment where people have been trained a while ago, they're just going to do things differently. And it's not that it's wrong, but it's sort of also trying to get people on board to be like, all right, let's keep learning, let's keep innovating, that we can function in parallel. But like there is a benefit to kind of, continuing on with your education in order to provide the best care for patients. And so I think that's a challenging thing because you have a lot of people that are entering the field at a very different educational platform. Obviously, you have people such as myself that have done these super complex ab wall reconstruction fellowships, but you also have people that do MIS fellowships. And what I have found here is like, they'll send you a hernia and you'll be like, okay, this is a complex hernia. And sometimes it's somebody that has just a large hernia. And sometimes it's a guy that like has no pubis and is like a 3-time recurrence. And you're like, oh my gosh, the spectrum of hernia disease is huge.
Enormous, yeah.
And so trying to get everybody kind of on board and understanding, I think like the hardest thing is getting people to understand that hernia surgery can be extraordinarily complex. And no, we're not doing all the GI reconstruction and these crazy Whipples and vascular recons. But like we have an opportunity to really impact somebody's quality of life for better or for worse. And this is not something that you just kind of come in and, do one here or one there. It's like it actually takes a lot of thought in order to get the right team around you, do the right operation, provide the right postoperative care. And, even myself, like I think one of the things that's important for me is I have to keep innovating because I have seen hernia surgery mature in my very short career lifespan. There's no doubt that it's going to be like that for the next 10 or 15 years as we start to kind of understand long-term outcomes, et cetera. So, yeah.
Yeah, the whole field is kind of just in this like full court press of growth and of innovation, and it can be just bewildering, and especially for those of us that still. I mean, I do a good number of hernias, but I still do other stuff as well, and so every once in a while, you get on where there might be like the International Hernia Collaborative or something like that, and you look and you go, wait, what's that abbreviation stand for? Like I just learned the last one. And you're like looking it up going, wait, what is going on here? But it's interesting. Like you said, we're in this kind of flux where we have so many new techniques, many of which are so young that we don't know, we don't really know like 15, 20-year data on some of these. And so some of them are probably obviously going to turn out to not be as as beneficial long term as we had hoped.
Mm-hmm.
But do you feel like there's the adaptability of the specialty as a whole, but then there's also like that adaptability that you have to have as a surgeon in the actual surgery, like during the surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully you hope that your preoperative workup was good and that you're not having to adapt too much beyond your expectation. But do you feel like the adaptability that you kind of had to display early in your career, moving through your education and things, is that something that drew you to hernia surgery and abdominal wall surgery as a field of specialty?
Yeah, so actually, I didn't want to be a hernia surgeon. As a PGY3, I actually applied for an integrated vascular spot. That was, there was just a fantastic vascular surgeon that I worked with as an intern that was just the nicest human being, technically competent, that let me do an AV fistula in the wrist when I was a PGY1 on a Saturday. And it was like, he took his time, he let me do it. And I was like, these operations are technically demanding. They are very, very cool. The disease process is cool. And I was like, that is what I want to do. So I applied for this, integrated vascular surgery spot, and I didn't get it. And I was like, obviously bummed about it at the time. And then kind of the reason I could, wasn't even really thinking the world of hernia until actually Ajita Prabhu approached me and was like, hey, listen, what do you think about ab wall? We think you would be a good candidate for it. And I was like, well, let me think about it. And ultimately, the reason why I went into the fellowship that I did is that I had a lot of respect for Rosen. He is somebody that, I kind of aligned with from an educational standpoint, in the point that, I grew up playing competitive sports. I knew that if I did training with him, I would actually be able to do whatever I wanted and be okay at it, because it was like, if you're in the wrong plane, you are in the right plane immediately. It was like, I will be very direct about what I expect. We will teach you good operative principles, and literally just teach you how to operate well. And so I sort of thought, this is going to be great. Like, I'll, whatever life brings at me, I'll feel as though that I'm like technically competent.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't really until kind of almost like, honestly, PGY4, PGY5 year, as I, had already was going to be their fellow, kind of really started to dig into the niche of ab wall. You see these really big operations because, I think one of the things that a lot of people don't, maybe even I don't realize, is that like, you're in this institution with all these fantastic hernia surgeons, but as like a junior resident, you're kind of just like, all right, like just don't die or have a problem. And you really don't understand kind of like the nuances and understanding and all of that stuff kind of associated with that field. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't really until, I was a PGY4 and PGY5 that I was like, okay, like, you see these people, they do these, and honestly, like all of them, they're great operations. They were into research, really good technical principles in the OR, and they just seemed like a really cool group to hang out with. They prioritized their family. The hospital and good surgery was important to them, but it wasn't their life. And so I would say from that standpoint, I was like, oh, like these people seem to have it together. Mm-hmm. They are doing something right. And I think it was a lot of that, but also a lot of like, once I kind of matched into the fellowship, that was like, all right, this actually has a real opportunity for growth, and something that I like really align with in terms of just like how neat the operations look, how stepwise they are. They kind of are very like congruent with how I think. And so that's very helpful. And then we did this operation where we had to cut through some stratus mesh with a sternal saw. So that also was pretty interesting. So I was like, oh, so this is hernia surgery that everybody speaks about. So yeah.
Yeah, we you said so many good points during some of this conversation already. But one of the things you were talking about is like the complexity and how even complex hernia surgery is such a broad scope of complex. And so, and so I think that some people that may identify as complex hernia surgeons, like there are still things that, that whenever I see it, I'm like, this needs to go someplace different,
Yeah.
and you talk about like the adaptability, you talk about the Whipples or the vascular reconstructions and things like that. It's interesting because in many cases, these complex hernias can have some similarities but I don't think that the expectation of the broader medical community of surgeons that don't do that type of work, and then especially from patients, they don't have the same level of tolerance of complications or the same level of tolerance or expectation of outcomes. And so it's a very unforgiving field in some regards. And beyond that, I think the problem that I see just from afar, from a lot of people getting into it, what I try to really impress upon the residents that I work with is the success of the hernia surgery really being determined long before you get into the operating room, that the importance of the clinic and the preoperative workup and optimization and everything, and because I think there's like kind of an old school mentality in many cases where you get in, you're like, well, if I find this or this and in a bad gallbladder, I'll just convert, or I'll do a cholangiogram, or I'll do this or that. And it's kind of like that on the spot decision making. But whenever you get into a complex hernia, it's whenever you have to be adaptable and you have to have all these tools in your tool belt. But if you get into a situation which you're not prepared for, it can get out of hand quickly. And it doesn't get out of hand in a way that, usually the patients aren't like coding on the table or, or things, but pretty soon, they're in post-op or years later and you're going, uh-oh, that didn't turn out the way I wanted it. And so it's a very interesting and humbling field in both that it is very complex, but it's kind of underestimated in its complexity. And then also requires a lot more focus on the outpatient pre-op planning than a lot of surgeries do.
Oh my God. Well, I always say, like, I have the, I guess, opportunity to care for a lot of these really loss of domain hernias. And I always say to patients, like, when you have a hernia of this size, people are like, it's still just a hernia, right? And a lot of people defer their care because they're like, well, it's just a hernia. So we have these people that have been walking around huge hernias for like a decade. And I think the thing is when you have like a cancer surgery and you're undergoing a Whipple, you kind of expect there to be some amount of postoperative morbidity associated with that because it's a big operation, like a CABG. You're expecting a problem to happen. And I think when a patient walks in, they're very much like, I understand that I'm sick. This is a really big operation. If something bad happens, then that's sort of an expected or like not unexpected outcome, I will say. And here I am sitting with these patients to say, listen, we're going to fix your hernia. You've had multiple repairs that have failed. This time's going to be different. We may take you from the OR to the ICU intubated, but everything went totally fine. And it's expected. And that's like such a huge mental jump for the patients to get to when they're like, none of these things sound like it's a smooth operation.
Right. Yeah.
And I completely agree with you. Like the margin of error is so narrow because the impression that people come in with it is just a hernia. And I think a lot of times as hernias grow in size, they are, become symptomatic in such a slow way that it's like, well, yeah, it's bothering me, but I've been living with it for so long. Like, and a lot of people have told me no. So it's like, you're kind of trying to get somebody from like, do I even need this fixed to like, yeah, we're going to fix it. But, you might be intubated after and trust me, everything's going to be okay. Like the leaps are massive. And I also tell like all of the residents on my service, like the thing about being a hernia surgeon is you are the only one that cares about the abdominal wall. Your colorectal surgeons don't care about it. Your urologist will take portions of it in order to do a good cancer operation. So not only do you have to know everything about hernia surgery, you have to know everything about all of these other subspecialties because they're going to take your tissue, they're going to be in your planes. And when you are planning on these operations, you kind of have to know where people have been before, what tissue is going to be missing, where parts of the dissection will be challenging. So it's kind of like, it really is not just a hernia. Like you have to kind of be this like, a little bit of everything to kind of figure out exactly how am I even going to do this operation? What tissue is going to be there? What plane should I be in? And so it's not as straightforward as close the hole, put the mesh in, run away.
Yeah. You're like, oh, stick a port in and you're looking at the rectus muscle, like from the inside. You're like, oh,
so devastating.
Perfect.
Right.
Excellent. Didn't catch that on the CT. No, it is a humbling field. And in my own practice, I've shied away. I've gotten to where, though it's not exactly 100% accurate, I'm like, this isn't a hernia surgery. This is an abdominal wall reconstruction. And that's like, for some reason, it like that kind of shifts it in a few people. And then other people show up and, they're in pre-op and we're about to do this like huge case. And they're just like all happy-go-lucky, like, so when can I get back to playing golf? And I'm sitting there going like, well, we need to let's reestablish the level of seriousness that we need to have going into to what we're about to undertake. But it is it's definitely something that because hernias are so massively wide and how far they can go from like just a stitch to the biggest of the big, and like you said, those loss of domain cases, a hernia surgeon better be really up to speed on like pulmonary and cardiovascular function dynamics and things, because you're having to take that into consideration at like every step of the operation. And am I putting them into compartment syndrome or all these other things that definitely not just a straightforward, definitely not a plug and patch from the old days. That's for sure.
Oh my gosh, no. Well, and I think that's like something that's also really unique about the world of hernias. You have things that are true, like, they're hernias, these small umbilical ones, the groin, first time groin hernias, you have to deal with that. And then you have these like absolutely massive cases. And we're kind of using the same nomenclature to discuss all of it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's also something that's really challenging. And I'm sure that we'll kind of move forward is yes, you have your hernia disease, but then you also have this like ab wall recon niche of hernia surgery, which is like completely different, and what we need to do is completely different. And maybe what we're doing, for both of these things can be innovated significantly. Yeah. But it really requires you to kind of think out of the box and say, okay, and like, I fully prepared myself, like, now I guess 6 years into my career, that like in 5 years from now, all I'm going to be doing is reutars. Like, people will have their mesh cut through for a various number of reasons. Yep. And so like my practice is going to be way, way different. Mm-hmm. And the challenging thing about hernia surgery is, you're right, our failures don't happen immediately. I think if we were surgeons and had some more immediate feedback, like, GI leaks or like your hernia immediately falls apart, like that would be very, very, very good for us and informative. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we're all much better surgeons than that. And a lot of times our problems happen 1, 2, 5, 10 years down the road. And if you're not at the same institution, and even if you are, like, understanding why things have failed is very, very challenging. And so oftentimes you get no feedback about what you're doing. And so, as you said, like our issue is these things fall apart over time, and we just have very little way to capture that data well.
It keeps me up at night. I'll admit that's like one of the things that I like wake up in the middle of the night and I'm just going, man, I hope that the decisions I'm making now aren't, 20 years down the line, cautionary tales, cause and I will say, just from a personal standpoint, I have a really hard time just personally outside of surgery in general, like giving myself grace for decisions that I made in the past that I made with the best information I had at the time, and that now I know more or different. And I'm like, I wouldn't make that same decision now. I have a hard enough time giving myself that grace in my personal life. And then I add in the immense like pressure I feel for patient care, and it can become, like I said, it keeps me up at night. It's not something that I take lightly.
Yeah. I think, if you are not at least nervous a little bit and not sleeping well, you're probably not caring for patients as much as maybe you could be.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly, I see, those people that they have or the memes with the phone on at night. I would say having access to the EMR on your phone is probably the most terrible thing
it's a
that
disaster.
you could have as a surgeon. Because you're like, why are they updating their vitals? And it was because they just put them in 5 minutes ago. And you're like, ah.
Yeah.
So that's me also.
Oh, it's me. Well, I'm the one that's I wake up at 2 a.m. and the nurses on the floor know me, and most of my stuff, a lot of my stuff's outpatient now. So the days of me taking high volume ER call where everybody was on the floor are gone. But nowadays I get the 2 a.m. call. It's like, hello, Dr. Elms, and I'm like, they're like, they were walking around the floor when we took their vitals. I'm like, okay, well, what are their what's their heart rate now? They're like, it's 86. I'm like, okay, good. Yeah. I'm going to go back to sleep for another 30 minutes.
Yep. Well, the thing is once you're awake, you can't go to sleep. No. It's like this rabbit hole of all right, well, yeah. Oh, most of the time, especially when I'm doing some of these really big cases, as I am falling asleep, replaying the moves in the OR, having worst case scenario play through my head. And I'm like, oh my gosh, and then with the anesthesia monitor beeping in the background, that's my nocturnal lullaby at this point.
I found the one. I thought that the EMR on my phone was the worst, and then I found the boss of mental health disasters for me, and that is the DV5 robot that records all my cases on an easily watchable platform. My wife will wake up. It's 3 a.m. I've got a surgery on 4 times speed, and I'm watching it over and over again. She's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I don't know. Maybe this stitch could have been better. I'm hoping that wasn't under too much tension. Did I do this enough?" And she's just like, "You got to go to sleep." And I'm like, well, "I've already tried that. This is so far past me going to sleep. I'm just going to be taking it's going to be a 2 energy drink kind of day this day." So
my husband also makes fun of me because he was like, You watch the robot all day, and then you come home and you watch the videos all night. And I'm like, you watch golf all day and then watch golf all night. It's the same thing. It's just different.
Now, you said you played sports growing up?
Yeah. I played college soccer, actually.
Nice. So did my wife. Yeah, she was. I went to my first soccer game. She was playing. She played at Oklahoma City University. I actually played. Nice. I played a year of college basketball and was like, no, not for me. I injured my knee, and it was just like, well, that's a natural ending point for this career. But I went to the first college soccer game that she had, and it was 105 degrees on a July day in Oklahoma City. And so I'm sitting there in the stands. It's NAIA Division I women's soccer. So it's me and 5 people in the stands. And I'm sitting there, first time watching a soccer game ever, because I came from a small town. We didn't have enough to field a full football team, much less a full football team. But so we're sitting there, and it gets done. 90 minutes is over. They're tied. They play an overtime. They're tied. Play another overtime. So we're sitting there 110 minutes in 105 degree heat, and it's 2 overtimes. I'm like, okay, well, now we get the shootout. Nope. They just shook hands and walked off the field in a 0-0 draw. And I
my gosh.
I was like, what just happened? And she's like, it was a draw. I was like, you guys just played for 110 minutes and didn't even determine a winner? And she's like, no. I was like, I don't understand this sport at all.
Oh my God. Were you there to impress a future girlfriend, or were you actually dating at this time?
So, we were a little bit of both. No, we were dating. We had been dating for 6 months, even more than that, 8 months. We started dating at boarding school in high school. And nice. We ended up, she had actually got into the Naval Academy and decided not to go. So she needed a place for college, and I was going on a basketball scholarship, and she ended up getting a college soccer and academic scholarship. So she joined me. But
that's awesome.
It was one of those deals where the level of commitment to our relationship was a little bit out of whack. I was deeply in love with her, and she was not feeling it. And so it was one of those things where I was always just I was like a little puppy, just ran around after her. So I was I'll sit in 105 degree heat every day. No, but it was yeah. So yes and no. And so both kind of
That's
both
awesome.
all at once.
I met my husband after I played soccer. He actually played college baseball in South Carolina. And obviously had not attended any of the sporting events whatsoever. And I was kind of like, as a Canadian, I don't understand baseball or, the technique required to play baseball. And he did all of his training in New York and I was in Cleveland. So we were apart for quite a long time. But whenever we would go to New York, I was, again, trying to teach him like winter activities as a Canadian. So we would go to Chelsea Piers quite a bit. And so I taught him how to skate, which was absolutely hilarious because he like got the hang of it quite quickly as a natural athlete. And then like 5 minutes later, he gets like taken out by a small kid. And I was just like dying laughing. But we went to like the batting cages and here he is like just hammering like 70 or 80 mile an hour fastballs. I was like, oh, you actually really played baseball. Okay. You were quite good at your sport. Very good. Fantastic.
Yeah, I played. We were in. I think it was actually medical school. We were in medical school, and we got into an indoor soccer league. And so she's like, "It'll be fun. You should play." I'm like, "Okay." So I get out there, and like the first game, somebody like comes down, and I'm guarding them like a basketball player. And she's like, "You're moving like a basketball player." I was like, "I don't know how to move. Like I'm between him and the goal. I don't know." And so it eventually, like, she comes down, and the time that sealed my fate that I was never getting invited back to that team was they kicked the ball, and it was coming like right at my face, and so I caught it because it was coming at my face, and she was just like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "They kicked it in my face." And she's like, "Okay." So that was the last indoor soccer game I played. And I don't think I'll ever be invited back.
Yeah. My husband and I have not done any co-team sports. That's probably not the best. But we try to golf together now.
Not good.
No.
Yeah.
I go for like 5 holes and I'm like, I'm out.
There's one thing that is certain is that my wife is always ready to play a game with me, like as far as board games or what have you. And she usually just beats the snot out of me until she doesn't. And then that's the last time we play that game.
I mean, that is absolutely fair. I can be on board with that.
We were playing rummy and I lost like 150 times in a row. And then I beat her the first time. And I don't think we've played rummy since. So she is not a very, there are a lot of people that have their like, Achilles heel of who they can't lose to. And it annoys her. Of course, I can talk a pretty good smack game. So it's not, I don't blame her that much, but it's one of those deals. So what do you do? So you're in Rochester. What do you do for your fun besides flying all over the world to scuba dive?
Oh, that's pretty much it. In the summer, I actually have a small garden plot that the city that I live in has a community garden. So I start my little seedlings actually like next weekend. They get all planted in the garage. And then mid-May, we get them planted in the ground. And so tend to my little garden plot. The thing that I honestly miss about Hershey the most is you could put anything in the ground there and it would grow. Like the soil was just so fertile. So I had this beautiful peach tree that made fresh peaches and my garden was fantastic. Rochester winters are not great for like literally any plant. So I'm constantly kind of curating things in my yard. I run I don't play soccer anymore, but I run like all of the time. I have 2 doggos that take up a lot of my time, and then we live on a golf course, so I'm extraordinarily stubborn. And I'm like, if I'm looking at the course, then I might as well learn how to play this game because I literally look at it every day. However, golf is the most frustrating thing in the world. And sometimes I'm frustrated at work. So why would I come home and then pick a hobby where I am also frustrated?
Yeah.
This seems like a bad idea. So, we'll see how things go this year. Last summer, they did not go well. So we're slowly heading in that direction. But yeah.
A beer a hole helps. I'll just
This
tell you
is
that
true.
right now.
Mm-hmm.
It helps a lot. And the thing I've found about golf is there's usually one shot every round that makes you think you can play golf.
It's like the most insane thing in the world. You're like, okay, like 12 strokes on one hole, par the next hole. I'm like, this is the hugest roller coaster of a game. And because you have that one shot, you are just like seeking that one shot over and over and over again. And you're like, I just can't do this.
It's like the Dumb and Dumber of sports too, because you get to the end of it and they have like one shot and it's like, what's the chance of that happening again? It's like 1 in a million. So you're like, ooh, so you're saying there's a chance, and you're like back for that next round. Yeah. I loved playing golf. And then, I'm 6'3", so I worked with all the surgeons in residency and never requested the bed be higher, and I couldn't dig a hole to stand in. So my neck got all messed up. And so now I'm good for about 9 holes, and then my hands start hurting because of the old cervical spine. And so I don't really play that much anymore. My son, he's getting into it. And so hopefully I can get myself physically fit enough and all that. Everybody tells me I need to do yoga, but I don't know what's more painful, trying to stretch or be alone with my thoughts, but both of those things are pretty intolerable for me right now. So yoga just might not be my thing.
Well, I was, there's a new Pilates studio that's open next to my house, and I was like, I'll go check it out. And like, my husband is like an avid golfer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we have a sim in our garage. He gets up at 5 a.m. to practice the swing. Like, it's quite good. Which makes it even worse for me because here I'm like, can't even hit the ball. And he's like, oh, that was such a terrible shot. And it's like in the middle of the fairway. And we cannot golf together. But I'm here doing this Pilates, which is all of this like twisting and stretching. And I'm like, you know what this is probably very good for? Your golf game.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, that's I'm fairly inflexible in pretty much all areas of my life, not just actual flexibility, but
it fits with like the surgeon thing.
Yeah, it does. But I do think that, being an athlete, did you feel like being a college athlete kind of prepared you for residency?
100%. I think one of the things about being an athlete is you're kind of used to getting feedback that is probably not pleasant. Like, not everybody's nice to you as an athlete. And I think that's fine. Like, honestly, I think some of like the hardest things to do when you're training people is like, I have to give you feedback. It's not going to be comfortable for you to hear.
Yeah.
It's also not comfortable for me to give it to you.
Right.
So I think that's the thing is like when you are an athlete, you do realize that there is some amount of work that you have to do outside of regular hours to get better. Like, if you truly want to get better, you're going to have to invest a significant amount of time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That people are not always going to tell you that you are great. You're going to hear a lot of negative feedback. And I would challenge people that, like, honestly, the negative feedback is a lot more informative than positive feedback.
Yeah.
Because everybody says, oh, you're doing great, you're doing fine. Like, how do you improve upon that? You can't actually. And so there's that. And then the other thing is you're, for the most part, used to working with a team. Even some, single sports, you have a coach that maybe helps you if you're at a very high level, or you're on a team sport. Like, you are forced to interact with people that maybe you don't see eye to eye to, or eye to eye with. And so kind of, again, as much as surgery isn't an individual kind of event per se, or people think it is so much more of a team than people realize, in the OR, out of the OR, all of that stuff. So you kind of learn actually how to work with other people that, you certainly don't see eye to eye with, which is just kind of life in general.
Yeah, it also it trains you to have a short memory, or at least be able to perform through failure, because of the number of times that, you have that, for me, it would be go down and like miss the point blank layup on a fast break. And then the next time down, got to do the same thing. And that's always in the OR. That's always the hardest one when you have a case that doesn't go as well as you want it to, and then having to walk up to like the next patient after speaking to the last patient's family, you like walk up and do it all over again. And you're sitting there going, geez, wish I had only had one case today. Wish I could go home, but nope, that's just not the name of the game.
Well, it's like the hardest part about surgeries. When you think about some of the things that we have to do, you're kind of like, nobody else would expect you to do this. Like I was doing this case, like got into the iliac vein of a transplanted kidney. And like, obviously, like, blood everywhere. Everything was fine. The patient ended up doing okay. But like the next case I was doing was like almost the exact same access. And I was like, I don't think that and it's now like 3 p.m. because this case has taken forever. And I'm like, I don't think that I can actually mentally go there again because I'm not done mentally processing what just happened. And I would say this is the first time in my career I said to the patient, I was like, you know what? We are running significantly behind today. We should reschedule the surgery. I will find a date for you like in the near future. We ended up doing it like honestly the next day. But being like, oh my gosh, like as you said earlier, like giving yourself grace, like nowhere else do you like have to do these things and then immediately go to the exact same thing over again. Like, as much as we are surgeons, we also like are, athletes in a way where we have these like very, very strenuous challenges that we have to go through. And I would say like realizing that you don't have to be on job all of the time, that you are allowed to kind of prioritize yourself, which ultimately means you're probably prioritizing your patients when you have some of these like horrendous things happen. When I first started, thank God someone told me, they were like, when you start at Mayo, you're going to have all these complications that you've absolutely never had before in your life. And you're going to think you're a terrible surgeon, and it's okay. There are so many things that people were doing in the background that you have taken advantage of that you don't even realize. So like within my first like 3 to 6 months here, I had a loss of domain hernia that had like a terrible complication. We had a bowel obstruction from like the suture when you do the TAPP, just the suture caused a problem, and a posterior sheath breakdown. And I was like, oh my God, I am a terrible surgeon. And all of these things that are like relatively never events just kind of kept happening. And you're like, I am at a new institution doing brand new surgeries. And people are like, who is this person that is bringing these people back to the OR? And it sucks. It's brutal. I always say like surgery is a contact sport. Like things will happen despite your best effort. And that is the hardest part, is like you are doing everything that you thought was right and everything that you thought was safe, and it still didn't work out. And thank God somebody told me that like things would take a while to adjust, because I got through that. Things are much, much better now. But I mean, like it at some point you have to realize like this isn't about me. I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm taking great care of patients, and really kind of put yourself first. Because if you allow yourself to be okay, your patients will be okay too. And, it's not that I'm complication free. Like, things happen. And I think the thing that I've learned the most is patients in general are pretty grateful when you say, hey, we've got to do something about this. This is not going according to a plan. And as long as you stay with them through their, complication, every person that I've had has been actually quite grateful. We've been able to kind of manage those things, solve the problem, and we both get to the end in the end. And, it's just surgery's tough. Surgery is tough.
Well, you don't get to the level that you are without being at least a little bit of a perfectionist and a little bit type A to the fact that you don't go through the IMG route, bouncing city to city on the East Coast, you interview 3 places and match into Cleveland Clinic. I mean, damn, and then end up at Hershey, which smells amazing, by the way. I interviewed there.
Oh, delicious. Yes. My gosh. Yes.
I would be even heavier if I lived there. And then end up at Mayo Clinic. That pathway alone, whether, you want to admit it or not, is like a pretty incredible pathway. So you get up to a point where you are in that new setting people know where you came from. They understand that pathway. There are expectations, and those expectations are probably no higher than the expectations you put on yourself. And you get out there and you have like a hiccup, and it really stinks, because if those same two complications happen now, people would probably be like, oh man, that was a bad case. Must have just been a bad case. Right. Early in your career, we have, and there's nobody harder on surgeons than other surgeons, but we have this ability to be like, we don't ever give new surgeons the benefit of the doubt. They're always just like, oh, that guy must suck, or this person just must not be. Look at that. You know what I'm saying? It's that early phase of career. And I always try to warn people, because I struggled so hard with that in my career early on. It is so devastating. And then there's that level. And I work way better. You talk about teaching residents. I work way better with residents when I'm trying to like prevent them from being overly hard on themselves than the ones that don't have the self-awareness that they're not doing a good job. That's by far the hardest people for me to like try to coach up. Like the people that I'm like, chill, like this is your first or second time. Like you're going to get better at this. Like you're seeing the planes. You just had or you're going to be just fine. You're a 2, you got 4 more or 3 more years to figure this out. And so, those types of people, because my biggest problem is the way that I approach life, and it boils over into surgery, and it can affect it definitely affects my job satisfaction, is when I expect perfection from myself. And my surgeries, even the parts of my surgery that I have no control over, I still hold myself accountable for. And, you expect perfection from yourself. You go out, and for me, it's either I meet my expectation or I fail. And so I never feel success, but there's plenty of opportunity in the game that we're playing to feel failure. And on top of that the definition of failure for me doesn't just mean a complication or a bad outcome. It also means a case that I did that actually the outcome was fine, but it could have been faster. It could have been smoother. I shouldn't have had to rethrow that stitch, or I got done sewing in that mesh and it was crinkling up all messy. And the definitions of success are so narrow that I almost like exclude myself from even being able to hit it, even if I am perfect. And so in those situations, I think that early in my practice, it was even harder. And so you're talking about having those early, issues at a new facility, and that's so hard. It's just difficult.
Oh my God. Well, I think, as a resident and even as a fellow, you see all these people that seem to have like things together, and the surgeries go well. If they have a complication, it's like, and they manage it like fantastically. And you're like, oh, like life as an attending is going to be, super straightforward. It's great. Like I'm finally out on my own. I'm not being supervised or told what to do. This is great. Whenever I talk to residents and, med students, I'm like, listen, attending life is actually not much different than life as a residency and fellowship. You have a little bit more control of your time per se. You're certainly making more money, but it's almost a little bit more challenging, because when you're a resident, if you have any problems with people on your service or an attending, you're on that service for a short amount of time and then you leave. All right. If you don't want to do vascular, you don't have to pay attention to vascular. You can kind of, get by. Your patients, if they have a problem, sometimes you don't even know about it. They rotate off service. You're not answering all these phone calls. You're kind of very limited into kind of what you're experiencing. And yes, you have notes and documentation and preparing. I mean, when you're attending, you still have all those notes, documentation, and preparing. But now people are asking you, like, how do you want to build your career? You're constantly interacting with people that you may or may not agree on, and they have full control over your time. Like as a surgeon, yes, I can choose to book 8 hours or 20 hours of surgery, but how long that takes really depends on everybody else but me. And yes, I can kind of get through an operation relatively quickly, but it is my job to train people and to teach them. And, sometimes you have your fellow and sometimes you have a PGY too. And, they're not really offering you help based on the complexity of the case. It's like, this is the schedule, here I am. Right. And so there are so many things that you have to kind of mentally deal with when you are starting your career. And even now, like, getting through your day is sometimes just like, well, I'm here. I will fix the surgeries, or fix the hernias, and things will happen. And as a very type A and control type of person, you're like, why can't we? And you kind of sometimes have to like let go a little bit, to be like, all right, I can control the things I can. These are all the things that I cannot control. And just make it through the day. I will say, like, having my husband's an anesthesiologist, so he obviously is in the OR as much as I am. Well, not as much as I am, but in the OR as well. And, having a little bit of perspective of like, these are the things that you can actually have control over. Here are the things that you just got to let go. And the thing that he says the most is he's like, nobody will care about what you're doing as much as you do.
Yes.
You are by far the most invested person. And so you just have to sit with that and realize that's where you're coming from. Everybody else is just trying to get their job done. And there will always be that difference. So just live with it. And I'm like, you know what? It's very sage advice.
Yeah. I, that may have been the first time that anesthesia wasn't wrong. That with that one bit of advice. See, I would hold that over if my wife was anesthesia. I'd just be like, I've won every argument forever because it's always anesthesia's fault. But no, I think that it's a very interesting thing whenever you go through your day and it's like this accumulation of like microaggressions. And I'm just like, okay, gonna swallow that one down. And then like, okay, gonna swallow that one down. And then I come home and there are days I'm just like, I don't mind if other people don't care. I just want people to not actively work against what I'm trying to accomplish. Like if I don't mind, just don't do anything. Just stop completely. I'll like, just please. And it stinks because sometimes I come home and, you just bring it home with you. And that just the frustrations boil over and come home and like my kids will be, just being kids. And I'm just like, God, just like, please stop, and then you get done. And like, oh man. And then most of the time my kids are more mature than I am. So they're like, Dad, that wasn't a very good way to parent. And I'm just like, oh no, not right now. Don't say that right now.
Oh my God.
But so I gotta ask the Instagram handle. I love it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
What's the origin?
Oh, in my first job, I saw this person that clearly was having obstructive symptoms from their inguinal hernia, like really old person. For some reason, they decided to do a capsule endoscopy to figure out what's going on. And I'm like, that's a terrible.
Now they're obstructed.
It's going to get stuck. Yeah. And they were being like I met with the patient. He was quite nice, the wife and the son. And they were being kind of super wishy-washy about surgery. And I'm like, listen, like this is an open inguinal hernia, like pretty straightforward. I mean, I definitely think you need to have this done. You can work up whatever sort of motility or after, but like until we like deal with this hernia with Val, like, I mean, this is certainly going to be a question of everybody's. And after like a couple of months, they ended up actually in Paul's clinic. The surgeon or the patient was like, oh, I was fine with Dr. Horne. And his wife was like, we like Dr. Horne. She was very pleasant, but we kind of felt like she looked too much like a Barbie in order to fix the hernia. And I was like, okay. And he was like, of course, Paul, I was like very, very polite and nice and was like, Dr. Horne is like fantastically trained. She's a very good surgeon, etc. But is more than like, capable, but I'll fix your hernia. And I was like, it's an open inguinal hernia. I'll see very many more in my lifetime. Right. I'm not at all. But sort of, put it out there to be like, listen, I'm aware of what I look like. I often get asked about how young I am, how many of these I do. And it's just sort of kind of the nature of, honestly, like at this point, everybody's job. Like, yes, I get maybe a little bit more than most because I'm a female and I look young. And I'm doing like quite a complex practice for someone that's fairly junior in their career. And so those questions come up quite a bit. And I think it was done to kind of say, hey, listen, like, yes, we can get over that hump and then just start talking directly about, how we can care for you. And actually, it's been a way to connect with patients on a level that has been absolutely fantastic, actually. Yep. So I have a patient, whenever they see me, oftentimes, if I get to see them at their 1-year post-op visit, they'll give me little Barbie things.
That's so awesome.
I have a patient that has huge subxiphoid hernia that actually used a tennis ball to keep it reduced. So she would wear 2 bras and then double like those white abdominal binders over top of it with the tennis ball to keep it in. And after a year after we fixed her hernia, she gave me a brand new tennis ball. It's named Tilly. A bright pink box with a pink bow, and it sits in my office. So now I get all these adorable, cute pink things from patients because of it. And I think it hopefully helps other people that are junior in the field that have some amount of thing that they're it's super annoying that people ask me about this. And, it happens. It absolutely happens. And from my perspective, you can either kind of let that irk you, or you can say, listen, it is what it is. It's part of my personality. I'm not going to get shorter anytime soon. So I might as well use it to my advantage and move on.
Yeah, you've kind of harnessed the jokes on them. And patients love their physicians and their surgeons being human. And it's just and they also, I had a patient one time early in my career. There was only 2 of us in the practice. And so they called it, I need to make a follow-up appointment with your surgeon. And they said, well, which surgeon did you see? He said, I don't know. And they go, well, were they young? Were they old? Then my partner was a 75-year-old Chilean guy, and there's me, and they go, it's the one that looks like the Canadian lumberjack. And that's
there you go.
Okay, I had long hair at the time, so it worked. It worked more than it does now. But but yeah, no, I think it's interesting. That's definitely something that my wife talks about, being an OB-GYN, going in and delivering the baby, and then coming back in, and the husband being like, are we ever going to see the doctor? And she's just like, no, I've been here the whole day wearing a tag that says MD. Just did the delivery. But yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those things that I never have to deal with that. People early in my career, they used to say that I looked young. They don't say that anymore. Kind of wish they would, but that's neither here nor there. But do you feel that's something that early on, did it make you irritated, or is that just something that's always just been kind of whatever?
I think earlier on it did. Now, honestly, I just it doesn't even create any sort of emotion at this point. I think there is an opportunity to kind of choose to let that bother you. There's certainly some situations where the fact that I'm young, and I feel as though I'm not kind of getting the, maybe respect is the best word, for the training that I have or knowledge that I have. It certainly does irk me. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I think you kind of, when it comes from patients, again, they're just patients. All right. Nobody intentionally does things, for the most part, I find, to be offensive.
Yeah.
And everybody just wants the best care for their family members. And so, especially now, there are hernias coming out of my eyeballs. And so if I don't fix one because you don't like how I look or whatever, it's not a big deal. It's probably not a good way to start this surgical relationship anyways. I will say sometimes I use it to my advantage. It's very easy for me to call from Dr. Horne's office and sound like a nurse. Great, awesome. I get to kind of navigate this. So, it is what it is. Yeah. Yes, people assume a female voice from an office is a nurse. And sometimes I might not correct them if I don't want to go down the whole spiel of et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
But, I think there are certainly, the world for women and men in surgery and in the world of medicine is not the same. But I do think there are opportunities for you to kind of grow and learn how you can leverage the things that women do very well and men do very well to benefit your patients and your partners. And so I never think that I'm going to be treated like a male or want to be treated like a male or identical. Like there are things that I'm naturally going to do different because of my gender, and I think that's fantastic. And so I'm just going to, be me and leverage the things that I do well at. And if those things kind of align with, the fact that I'm a female and might spend a little bit more time or a little bit more caring, I'm not going to care if you call me honey. Okay. Most people don't call their person that they do not like honey. So at least we know that you are happy with me. And so I can be okay with that. It does not bother me at all.
Yeah, that's I would probably not be so graceful, frankly. But then again, my wife says I'm 100% driven by spite. So maybe that's more of a character flaw than anything. But, many of us are in education of residents. And so it always is something that I try to be cognizant of the way that my female trainees are treated differently than my male trainees. I would be lying if I didn't say that nurses write up our female residents way more frequently than our male residents for literally the same statements or the same behavior. And neither of them are being inappropriate. It's just the perception changes. For a guy like me who realistically has never really personally experienced that type of bias, I'm a 6'3" white dude from Oklahoma. I'm not exactly, in the minority most places I'm at. How should I handle that? Do you have any tips for folks like me that want to be cognizant of it, but also don't want to be demeaning or assume that they're not empowered to take care of themselves or need to be, quote, taken care of in any way? How do I approach that in the most thoughtful and meaningful way?
I think having I like to use the term male champion is something that is oftentimes kind of gets, especially female trainees or females, kind of like out of this, role is seen as less, I will say. A lot of times I agree. Like the thing that is most horrible about what happens to a woman trainee is oftentimes it's not men that are a problem to the women, it's other women. And we have to figure that out, number one. But I think, especially when you see it happening, if you say, hey, listen, I understand that you have a problem with this trainee, like what she's doing is not wrong, and kind of just nipping that in the bud before it even kind of escalates to a complaint, or even, bringing that nurse aside, whoever complained, to be like, hey, listen, this surgeon, she's a very important member of the team. I think she acted, with accordance as to how I would act. I think sometimes it can be uncomfortable for males to stand up for women because they don't want to be like, well, I don't want to feel like I'm like, putting you down or anything like that. But I think a lot of times we do, would love to have someone interject to be like, listen, she knows exactly what's going on and I respect her. My chief resident makes the same decisions I would make. So if she said that this is what's going on, then I have full faith in her and, will proceed with how, she has decided to care for this patient. And I think that is an uncomfortable situation because most of the time, it's uncomfortable to begin with. And I think a lot of times men prefer to not interject themselves into the discomfort, which is totally reasonable. But especially when you see somebody saying like, calling your resident, a nurse or not addressing them as doctor right in front of you, that's an opportunity to say, hey, no, this is Dr. So-and-so. And while it is uncomfortable for just a few seconds for everybody, the lasting impression that trainee has because you stood up for them in an uncomfortable moment, and for that, you're not doing anything that's patronizing to the patient or the nurse or whoever it is, it corrects the problem immediately. And now it's kind of like, okay, because I think a lot of times, especially in my life, I would have loved to have the more senior male stand in and be like, no, like you can't speak to her like that, or this is actually the doctor. But a lot of times that doesn't happen. And so we're kind of forced to navigate this world. And I think one of the things that is unfortunate is I think a lot of times people are like, well, women have to, storm the castle by themselves. So this is a very gender separate experience, but like, that's not how we function. All right. We work with other genders. And so this is something that we can work together to make both of us better. So I think there's a lot of misperception that if we elevate women in the field, that we will be seen as less. And that's very, very untrue. Like, we function great together. And when we elevate women, we have an opportunity to learn from more women. We also have an opportunity to interact with men more. And that's just kind of the nature of how life is. And so I, very much see that, when we put women in fields of power or leadership, the same thing that we should do for men. Like, it just, both of us are here. Let's make it comfortable for everybody. But yeah, if I could give you one piece of advice, I would say, if you see it happening in front of your eyes, just, interject really quickly. And oftentimes that problem will no longer be a problem. And I will say the person that's going to remember it the most is that female trainee that was like, finally somebody said something. And I will venture to guess that they probably won't forget it for a long time.
Yeah, so really kind of more of a empower and support. They don't, not necessarily like quote save. So it's more of a And I mean, and just to your point, being a fantastic surgeon, being a fantastic leader, fantastic human being is not gender specific or gender influenced. And I think we have the opportunity, to make a field that has all kinds of people to treat all kinds of patients, because different patients are going to connect with different people, and that's irrespective of gender, nationality, whatever. But it's if you only have one type of person or one, if we have a mold that we're creating somebody out of that we think is like the perfect idea of a hernia surgeon, we're going to have a portion of our patient population that doesn't connect with them and is not receiving. They may receive good care, but they may not be receiving the full experience of comfort and connection with their surgeon that can really bring them into a feeling of making a really difficult situation for them as easy as it can be. And so I think it's incredibly important. And I don't think I cared about it near as much. I'm definitely not some like, I've had many times in my career I probably could have done way, way better than I did in regards to that. But becoming a girl dad, that'll change your perspective real quick. And I'm just
I'm sure.
So then I'm just like, okay, somebody's going to pay for this, But it unfortunately, as with most things, it doesn't matter near as much until it affects you, and and I'm probably no different. But definitely appreciate your willingness to talk to that, because I do think it is something that's extremely important, but it's also something that we want to navigate in a thoughtful way, because again, I think that even efforts to do the right thing can come across extraordinarily, the effect can be the wrong effect for even when it's like the best of intention, just like poorly executed. So I think it's important to know how to do it right.
I think also, in any, irrespective of gender, or race or whatever, you have an opportunity to be offended or just sort of move on. And if every little thing somebody says or does to you get offended by, you're going to live your life pretty offended. But if you can say, at least, develop some amount of like, I'm an okay person. So that like when people say things, it's so much easier, to just move on versus kind of let that sit and brew with you. And you think of like all of the time that you can spend with your kids. You want to spend that interacting with the kids versus sitting and brewing over some random off comment somebody made, probably when they're having a really bad day in the hospital, like whatever, like, and, we were talking to this about the beginning in terms of like, hernia data and women. And there are so many nuances to humanity and how everybody's presenting what life they're in. And I think, as we start to thoughtfully study different races, different genders, we're going to get a lot more data. And I think, there's perception that maybe we'll find out that we're doing things wrong. Well, what happens if we find out something wonderful and we're like, oh my God, we should have been treating everybody like this? And we found that out because we're looking at a completely different population or a different socioeconomic status. So more data is never bad. But as we start to kind of, again, grow this world of hernia with, providers in different locations, different training, different genders, we really just open the opportunities to care for all of our patients better. And we learn more because we have more perspective.
There's also something could be poetic if we find out that some of these different groups are not nearly as different as we thought.
Exactly.
So, well, it's been again, thank you so much for coming on. As we get towards the end of an episode, I always ask everybody their opportunity to give their hernia hot take. So this is your chance to give your hernia hot take.
Oh, what is my hernia hot take? I think it kind of branches on to the world of gender and hernia, and I would say what I would hope for the world or world of hernia moving forward is that we actually kind of start to solve some of these gender differences in hernia outcomes. Figure out why our women are not doing as well. Figure out how to care for half of the population that we operate on. And I think honestly, sometimes people think mesh gets a really bad rap. I love mesh. So much mesh. And so the answer is if it needs mesh, put mesh in, irrespective of gender. So those are my two hernia hot takes.
Those are fantastic ones. I again, thank you so much for taking your time. I know this is in a very busy world. Taking time to stop and have a conversation like this is something that could be kind of burdensome, but we really do appreciate your perspective and very much respect your opinion and appreciate it.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this will wrap up another episode of the Hernia Gods Podcast. This is your mere mortal host, Luke, signing off. Thank you so much.